Welcome to the Merseyside Pensioners Association podcast. This is our second programme designed to keep Merseyside pensioners in touch. The MPA is no longer holding its weekly meetings, so we hope this regular podcast will assist the process of us all keeping in touch. The MPA is known as the memory box of the labour movement on Merseyside. Our membership have a wealth of life, trade union and political experience. I'm Phil Maxwell, and our first guest is the membership secretary of the MPA, Paul Lafferty. The MPA is no longer meeting, but you've been keeping in touch, haven't you, with the members? What have you been doing?
I basically sat down and rung 20-odd pensioners over the landline. Have you ever rang 20-odd pensioners? Me included. We don't say hello, we just say hello and we have a nice conversation.
Yeah.
And so it can go on for a while.
I can imagine, yeah.
And we, of course, the ones that had their mobile phones, I text them and put my number in and say that the meeting was cancelled, and basically we would like to hear from them, and I gave them my number, and I did hear from a few, saying that they were okay, and that their sons, daughters, and such were looking after them. So it was nice to be in touch.
Yeah.
So that was a few things that I thought we sort of did in a hurry, and I was glad that we'd actually done the pre-work. Obviously, we didn't think of something like this was going to happen.
No, not at all. Yeah. Well, the Merseyside Pensioners Association, we might not be meeting once a week, but in many ways we're still active, aren't we?
Well, that's right. I mean, at the end of the day, there's mail flashing everywhere about various things that the protests are going on, and through the media, and the dissatisfaction in some ways of the governments and the hypocrisy of the announcements of "We love our NHS." Yeah. When for several years now they've been cutting without any mercy. So it does sort of strike a lot of the hypocrisy. Really hurts sometimes when you feel like shouting at the TV, and of course that's absolutely useless. Well,
you of course you were a councillor back in the 80s, and you were one of the 47 councillors who stood up to Margaret Thatcher, and I'm just wondering if your experience of that time and the sense of solidarity, do you think there's a message there for the present day?
Well, yeah, I think that. Well, first of all, I was vice chair of social services for Liverpool and chair of the child and family committee.
Yeah.
So it was very much in the social sort of background where we had resources, and we'd had people like Home Helps, people who had organisations that we were connected with. We had member employees that would see people on a regular basis. Yeah. So Home Helps particularly were tremendously took asset to the city. They get to know the people. They wouldn't be like today, I've only got 10 minutes, love, here's your soup, here's your cup of tea, goodbye. And I think that would the resources that we had then were amazing, really, and could have been, and were being improved as well. Which is, and it was, of course, it was under Margaret Thatcher, who was trying to cut everything anyway, and didn't believe in society. She said that, and so therefore we were up against it a wee bit, but we still maintained that sort of information and the care that we were of people, so they had the voice. We got value for money, and no one was taking a cut. That's as it is now, where some of these companies that are taking their money out of it before they actually pay out the staff and the wages. Yeah. So it's basically we didn't have all that, so all the finances went straight into care of the people within Liverpool.
Yeah. So how are you occupying your days?
Well, we had had some clothes to sort out. We do have a little collection of clothing to take to the asylum seekers down Windsor Street.
Yeah.
So I got up this morning. We were, and Barbara was like working through some of the clothes to make sure there's a reasonable clothing and they're a mixture. So we sorted them out. We probably we'll deliver them tomorrow. We'll pop in, but we usually ring up now and they take them out of the boot. So as we don't have any contact, we're sort of isolated. We're trying to self-isolate, basically. Yeah. And however, I've been talking to a lot of people from the pensioners and just making sure everyone's all right and throwing some jokes in. And of course, some of the jokes are really funny and inventive. And listening to Roger on his ukulele, and I'm practicing the ukulele. And I did say to Roger that I joined him one time, but I'm certainly not ready for it. I have to say.
Well, we'll be listening to Roger right at the end of the programme. He's given us permission to use his inventive voice and music, so that's something to look forward to. But thanks ever so much for talking to us, Paul. I'll probably come back to you in a couple of weeks to see how you're getting on. And keep up all the good work that you're doing. All right, cheers. Thanks ever so much, Paul.
Thanks, Phil. Cheers now. Bye.
You take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.
In recent years, there have been numerous claims that Britain's older generation has escaped austerity at the expense of the young. This view is both inaccurate and divisive. Today's battles on behalf of pensioners will benefit future generations, and equally, pensioners must stand alongside today's workers in defence of their jobs, pensions, and the right to a decent period of retirement. That's why the motto of the MPA is fighting for pensioners and all who come after us. These are difficult times for all of us, and for pensioners in particular. The MPA has been campaigning for years to save our NHS. We believe the NHS should be all-inclusive, free at the point of use, and include dental, eye and elderly care services. The internal market and privatisation should be ended, and there should be democratic control of services by both users and those working in the NHS. Our NHS should exist to care comprehensively for all citizens. Privatisation has been a disaster for the NHS, so I'm delighted that our next guest is MPA member and health campaigner Lesley Mahmood. So Lesley, thanks for joining us. At the last meeting of the MPA, you raised a number of concerns about the ability of the NHS to cope with the pandemic. What's your view at the moment?
Well, I think those concerns are actually being shown to be absolutely real, and I'll go into some of those concerns. But the other thing that I had a concern about was the complacency of some of the top management, for instance, in the CCG, basically spending about 5 or 10 minutes on coronavirus and much more on the agenda about reorganising the CCG and various other things. And that has actually made me even more angry as time has, as time has gone on.
Can you just explain to the listeners what the CCG is?
Yes, of course, yeah. That's the Clinical Commissioning Group, and it was a meeting in Liverpool a couple of weeks ago, where basically the reply to the question from some of us from the MPA and health campaigns were about what the plans were in place, and we just got told, well, each hospital has a plan.
Yeah.
I raised about what was happening about people, staff members who were, prepared to go on the infectious diseases teams, but were then getting told, well, they might only get £2 an hour to be on call, on top of working a 12-hour shift on either side of that. And the reply was, oh, you'll have to take that up with the agencies. We don't know about that.
Yes.
I raised the issue of sick pay because, as we know from activities that we've done at the Royal, for instance, that companies like ISS, who are subcontractors of various cleaning, etc., that they don't pay their staff. They don't pay their staff sick pay. Now, I have heard since that NHS trusts are meant to ensure that all staff on the NHS trust site who are sick are meant to get sick pay.
Yeah.
But I would be very interested to see if that's actually being carried out, because, as we know, companies like ISS have resisted paying the people who actually clean the floor, porter people around, dish up the food, keeping them safe. And the other thing that I raised was about the effect and the danger of migrant charges putting people off who may have severe symptoms from approaching the NHS because of a fear of being charged.
Yeah.
And, many of the health campaigns have been calling for those charges to be dropped. And the response was, there's no evidence to show that people are put off seeking treatment because of migrant charges.
But I think there's plenty of evidence to demonstrate that, isn't there?
Absolutely. And just one example from the Salem for Women's Hospital campaign that we're aware of, because the work that we've done, that we know that Maternity Action, Doctors of the World, amongst others, but also the NHS's own, it's a thing called an Embrace report, and it reports on maternal deaths. That they actually, in the official NHS report, it actually identifies that 3 pregnant women did die because they were too scared to come forward, because they feared they would be charged, and there's been research done on that.
Did you make that point at the CCG?
Yes. Yeah.
And what was their response?
And basically they looked, the person who actually said it, who was involved somehow in public health, sort of sat back and looked, because I actually had to say to the chair, sorry, I need to interrupt here, but there's evidence, and this is what I'm quoting from.
Yeah.
And they said, we could write to NHS England, but the fact that they just brushed all those concerns, it was really made me angry, because it was all either somebody else's problem. We don't have to do anything about it. And honestly, out of a 2.5-hour meeting, to spend 10 minutes and a couple of minutes on questions from the public answering those concerns, what the hell did they think they were doing?
Yeah. So is the NHS, do you think, able to cope with the pandemic?
Yeah, well, to go back to that point, obviously we know that the virus, the pandemic itself is totally, it's accidental, the fact that it's happened. But there's several things going on. First of all, the response needs to be absolutely clear, systematic, and follow established public health measures.
Yeah.
Now, I'm no expert in public health, but people like Professor Alison Pollock locally, people like Alex Scott Samuel, people like Professor John Ashton, but the World Health Organization, they've all raised the issue of testing, tracking, tracing, and that this government has actually had 52 days to follow that World Health Organization and standard procedure, if you like, and learn from China, South Korea and Singapore to test people, identify close contacts, track them, quarantine them, to go alongside a lockdown. And Alison Pollock's had some very interesting stuff to say about that. And Professor Alison Pollock is concerned in public health, an expert in public health, and one of the authors of the NHS reinstatement bill.
Yeah.
And what she's raised is actually we wouldn't necessarily have to have as severe a lockdown. We could have an area approach if we'd had testing, and it's still not too late in areas where there are fewer cases.
Yeah.
By quarantining people early enough, you can lock down people who actually are infected. So that's one thing. So the question is, what will the Libertarian Tories had 52 days to start thinking about this, and they've ignored that advice, and it's only tonight at 5 o'clock that they've actually started talking about testing, but this should have been getting done weeks ago. They've had massive teams out in those countries, literally thousands of people working on following the testing. But of course, the background of all of that is that we've had 10 years of austerity. We had the Lib Dems in coalition with the Tories, and the Tories basically stripping the NHS, depleting the NHS, a collapsing social care system, collapsing public health system.
Yeah.
We've had the wrecking of local government support systems, with the wrecking of social services, etc. And we've got a market economy with 5 million self-employed people alone who are reliant on having to turn up for work because they get nothing otherwise.
Indeed.
And that sort of arrogance of the government, and they keep going on, we'll do something for the self-employed. They've encouraged people off the dole to become self-employed, and now they want to leave them. They want to leave them swinging. So that's, that again is a major concern. But when you look at the news, this morning there was a firm on the Victoria Derbyshire show stating that they'd offered the NHS various forms of equipment, but they weren't contacted, and they've been giving orders to governments overseas.
Right.
And the British government didn't respond to their offer, which again is an absolute disgrace. Again this morning you've had doctors and nurses saying that they still haven't got the personal protection equipment.
Yeah.
They've got stuff that's out of date or inadequate, and yet we expect these people to go and nurse sick people and put themselves in.
It's just an amazing state of affairs, isn't it, really? When this all began, there was this extraordinary description of herd immunity. It was as if they wanted many pensioners and people with underlying health concerns to catch it and be at risk and die.
Yeah. In fact, I would imagine it's very rare that most people in the MPA would agree with Piers Morgan. But yesterday, Matt Hancock was denying to Piers Morgan that one of the chief officers of health had said anything about herd immunity, and Piers Morgan just got his phone out and played the chief officer talking about herd immunity back. And we know that behind Boris Johnson, we've got people like Dominic Cummings who embrace the herd immunity idea. Basically a social cleanse out, because at the end of the day, what older people, poorer members of the community, if they get it, the headline, loved ones will die, instead of actually taking an approach to protect everybody. Now they're waking up to the fact, hang on, if our NHS workers can't cope, if our NHS can't cope because we haven't got enough beds, intensive care units and all the rest of it because of the rundown of the NHS, they're realising, maybe I won't be able to get treated. But these measures should have, even just before, a journalist was saying that scientists and public health experts were really surprised that 2 weeks ago they didn't start bringing in these these measures, and it's been really a lot of bluff and bluster by the government.
Yeah.
A laissez-faire attitude, because the other week it was all, oh, well, we'll just let people decide and it's down to you, and there's no way that we should be allowing that. I mean, obviously we don't want quasi-dictatorship, and we have to be aware of civil liberties, rights and all that sort of stuff. But we needed the government to be taking this seriously and listening to World Health advice weeks ago. As I say, 52 days. What were we doing in the last 52 days in terms of getting supplies in, getting the army in and all the rest of it? I mean, NHS workers are still not getting tested. They're now talking about upping the testing, but that should have all been done in the early stages when there was relatively few people, because that's been the secret that's not secret, but that's been the method in China. Well, obviously that province, Wuhan, that was locked down was, the size of many countries, that they managed to lock everything down and then have massive teams of testing and tracking and quarantining. And that's how they are now in a situation where there's, a massive drop, or hardly, in fact, I think this week, most days this week, they've had no new cases. Because the problem is, and Alison Pollock and others have pointed this out, without the testing and knowing who's had it, if you start releasing the lockdown measures, it'll just be back out into the general population again.
Yes.
And that's the worry. And obviously now that, even the government are saying, oh, well, we want NHS workers to get back to work. But I know NHS workers who've potentially been in contact with people who've got COVID.
Yeah.
But they haven't been tested. They've had to take a fortnight off work instead.
But if you listen to the propaganda of the government, you would think that there is a huge testing programme going on. You would think that people who have lost their jobs are getting money, or it's coming down the line. But we all know now people who have been made redundant and they don't know how they're going to survive. And the testing isn't going on. I've got 2 members of my own family who are working in the NHS. They've not been tested and they're on the front line. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, again, this idea that we're going to protect renters, I've seen today in sort of reliable, by reliable journalists, that and organisations over renters, that rent evictions have only been put off from 2 months to 3 months. So if you lose your job, you go on universal credit, then you're probably going to be in rent arrears in up to nearly 2 months by the time you get your full money, and not all your rent is paid anyway. So in effect, what will happen is thousands of people can potentially be getting put out on the street, and the protection of the government that, oh, we're going to look after renters, just actually isn't there, because if you've got to self-isolate and stay indoors for 12 weeks, and you're in the gig economy, or as I say, you're behind, you eventually might get a bit of universal credit.
Yeah.
You're going to be out in your ear in 3 months, and I would say to people, be careful. Don't panic, but also don't blame people, because a lot of people feel pressured to go to work, like the scenes on the tube. Why aren't there enough trains to take people? And if you're in the gig economy and you face literally starvation or being evicted, you're going to make the decision, well, maybe I better take the risk and go to work.
Well, you would do, wouldn't you? Otherwise, you're not going to be able to put food on the table. I mean, and there's a lot of criticism about people going to work, but they, in reality, have no choice, because the safety net that ministers are talking about simply isn't there. It hasn't. But nobody really knows where the money's going to come from. And they seem to be propping up the corporations rather than dealing with the needs of ordinary people.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, you could introduce a guaranteed basic income for all, and then have that topped up by various other means. You could scrap the third child limit on benefits, until recently I've been helping people through my voluntary work applying for renewing and applying for PIP and ESA. Well, why doesn't the government just automatically renew everyone's benefits for 6 months and say we'll review them in 6 months?
Yeah.
So it's all down to the individual, while firms are busy, as you say, laying off people, cutting their pay. I mean, Waterston's telling people, take unpaid leave, it's coming out of your holidays. If you've got no holiday left, that's your next year's holiday as well.
Yeah.
Thoughts Direct declaring that they're essential to the economy, etc. All these firms trying to take huge advantage.
Yeah.
So we have to let them know we're watching them as well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of companies are just laying people off, but they're also guaranteeing that they will pay their workers wages, so it can be done. But, we've got all these rogue employers today who are just treating their workforce with contempt. I mean, I think what's really interesting is that people are realising who actually keeps the country going, who the real workers are. It is the doctors, the nurses, the people who take the rubbish away, and the list goes on and on. It's not the bankers, it's not the people who sit in boardrooms. And people, it makes you so angry to hear the platitudes coming out every day from the spin doctors in the government. It's very, very annoying. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's important to get the message out. And, while opposition or Labour, can support certain measures, I think either they're being silenced or they're just not being forceful enough. Because there is some stuff online, but it's so important to be raising all these issues of solidarity and raising what the reality is on the ground and holding the government to account. Because we can all get swept away by this idea. We've all got to pull together. Well, hang on. What bit of pulling together when you've got people left in their homes with no benefit, left in the homes with no social services, left in the homes with no care workers, left in the hospital without intensive care beds. That we've got to remember class and politics still come into this, because the response is based on politics and class, and it's certainly not based on looking after the vast majority of the population, who are, as you say, are actually the people who are going out and servicing our economy, providing us and keeping us safe. And I really it's really important that we get the political message out to say that when this is over, we have to hold the government to account for what they're doing now. We have to state clearly what they should be doing now and what they could have been doing, and basically say there's got to be a reckoning on this free market system, because that the market system has completely failed, and now these libertarian Tories are having to take drastic state measures reluctantly, because the whole economy is going to collapse if they don't. But they're doing it piecemeal, and so they're looking after the bigger businesses. They're not looking after the smaller people and ordinary working people. And that's what we've got to bear in mind. So I would urge people as well to do things like, follow Save Liverpool Women's Hospital, keep our NHS Public Socialist Health Association online if you want to read all the detail, of what's going on in terms of the detail of health. They're really invaluable sites. And also, let your MPs, let your councillors know what you expect to be done, so that they have a clear way, if you like, of what they should be demanding and what we expect of them, and not just to roll over and say, well, we've got a few crumbs and we'll have to make do with that. Sorry, that's not good enough when people's lives are at stake.
Thanks ever so much for that, Lesley, and I'll be coming back to you in the weeks ahead to talk about campaigns like the Women's Hospital campaign, and thanks so much for all your knowledge, and we really appreciate it.
Well, it's all gained from reading the campaigning resources.
Yeah.
But thank you, Phil, anyway.
Yeah.
And hello to all my wonderful MPA fellow members and comrades. Keep the faith.
Well, I think there will be. A lot of us are self-isolating, as you know, but we are, through social media, through this podcast, keeping in touch. And I know a lot of people are phoning around to make sure that our membership, and of course the people who they know, their neighbours, are safe and that they are getting stuff that they need. And it's that community action that is going to be more powerful than any words from Boris Johnson, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We organise our own solidarity.
Solidarity to you, Lesley. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Cheers, Phil. Take care now.
Take care. Bye. Bye. The MPA believes that a national care service covering both home and residential nursing care should be created, funded like the NHS through general taxation, free at the point of use and without means testing. These are fundamental human rights we are talking about. I was impressed by some heartening and wise words from MPA member Mary Harrison this week. She says, "Remember when Margaret Thatcher said, 'No such thing as society, only individuals and their families'? Well, I can say society is very much a thing. I received a note through my door from a group of 5 young people, presumably students, given I live off Smithdown Road. These wonderful young people are offering to shop or help in any way for those who are self-isolating or living alone. They have also asked their fellow students who may be leaving Liverpool to donate any food they don't want, and these young people will collect it and take it to the food bank. They are wonderful and deserve recognition for their selfless act. Brilliant generation, inclusive, tolerant, kind and hard-working. We should be proud of them." Thanks for that, Mary, and we'll be speaking to Mary in a later programme. Please feel free to share this podcast, and you will also find the film Pensioners United on our YouTube page, Merseyside Pensioners. Finally, we're pleased to end this week's programme with some original music written and performed by MPA member Roger Bannister. It's a brilliant satirical critique to the Tories' response to the coronavirus. This is Phil Maxwell saying I look forward to meeting you all next week. Stay safe and solidarity.
Okay, here it is, the coronavirus rag. It's clear we've got a problem with this coronavirus thing. A virus that could kill us all, but that's not why I sing. For we've an extra problem too in this our darkest hour. As if things were not bad enough, the Tories are in power. With Boris there in number 10, deciding what to do. It's clear from his pronouncements that he hasn't got a clue. He told us all to mingle for protection of the herd, then told us all to stay at home. He's frankly quite absurd. Delaying with compulsion, it's clear that Johnson's aims were protecting his insurance mates from paying out on claims. For that is what the Tories are in everything they do. More interested in big business than they are in me and you. The World Health Organization said that governments must test, but Johnson's record on this point is hardly of the best. The NHS is under strain, they're short of PPE, and successive Tory ward closures mean very few beds are free. Some people avoid politics politics, but I think it's a must. We've got to have someone in charge, someone that we can trust. We'll take the right precautions, of that there is no doubt, but we'd all be so much healthier if we get the Tories out.